Welcome to an evening of Holocaust Remembrance presented by the Rogers Center for Holocaust Education at Chapman University. I hope that in the fall, our events will once again be live on campus, even though we may continue to make occasions like tonight's available remotely for those who live at a distance or are unable to travel. Tonight, as we look toward the future, we also reflect upon the past. Memory is a central theme throughout the writing of author, Holocaust survivor, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel. Professor Wiesel described memory as the connector between past, present, and future. He saw memory as living and vital, not static and passive. And he believed that memory has the power to inform and guide our decisions and actions today. Professor Wiesel defined his own identity as that of teacher and witness. He loved being in the classroom, and he loved even more the questions that young people would bring to the classroom. As a presidential fellow at Chapman University, he met with students in many disciplines, from religious studies to history to music to French, and he eagerly anticipated their many questions. Each year that Professor Wiesel visited, we highlighted different themes in his works. He loved being surprised by what we came up with, and he was particularly pleased, indeed even astounded, by the program we created for April 2013. Several months before he visited, I asked Professor Wiesel if he would allow my colleague, Dr. Jan Osborne, and me to draw from his works to create a Reader's Theater program entitled The Worlds Within the Words of Elie Wiesel, envisioned as a symphony of voices. The final script included passages from 16 of his books. The performance on April 18th was truly an unforgettable experience for all of us. Tonight, we are pleased to share with you the final movement from that event, preceded by the hauntingly beautiful excerpt from George Enescu's Third Sonata for Piano and Violin, Opus 25, performed by violinist Iman Khosrowpour. The readers, who were then all Chapman theater majors, gave not only their voices and talent, but their hearts to this project. Now, 8 years and one pandemic later, we have reconnected with them as alumni to ask what that evening meant to them then and what it means to them now. I am grateful to the director of the 2013 production, Professor Nina LeNoir, to consultant Sherry Bard, and to Associate Director of the Rogers Center, Jessica Milamuk, for their efforts in contacting, recording, and editing the alumni responses to fit the time limits of our program tonight. As writer and teacher, Elie Wiesel struggled to find words to express the unspeakable. He wrote with precision and care, always cognizant of the tension between sound and silence, and always deeply aware of the power of words for good or evil, to turn us against one another or to unite us through our shared humanity. On that evening in April 2013, his words brought us together as a community of remembrance and of hope. I believe they will do so again tonight. I am grateful to Professor Wiesel's son, Alicia Wiesel, for allowing us to share his father's words once again. As we do each year, tonight we light candles of remembrance. Those candles will be lit by Holocaust survivors and their families, members of the second, third, and yes, even fourth generation. They honor the memory of the more than 6 million individuals, mostly Jews, who were murdered in the Holocaust, including more than 1 million Jewish children. The light of these candles also testifies to our shared commitment to the future, to creating a more inclusive community, free of the anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, and bigotry that culminated in the Holocaust. In his book, Witness, Lessons from Elie Wiesel's Classroom, our speaker tonight, Ariel Berger, quotes these words from Professor Wiesel, quote, "We each have blind spots, just as every candle casts its own shadow. Only when you place a second candle next to the first do the shadows disappear, illuminated by the other's light," unquote. May the candles we light tonight illuminate our path, sustain us in hope, and guide us from memory to action.
We usually light candles to rejoice, to mark the beginning of a holiday, or to usher in Shabbat. Tonight, we stand before candles that mark both loss and a connection, presence and absence. We light these candles to represent the souls lost during the Holocaust. Their spirits live on with us in our memories, and in the way our memories influence how we choose to live. May we remember that it is our responsibility to continue to speak out against anti-Semitism and the injustices in our world. Source of life's mystery, source of life's fragility, have compassion on us as we mourn our loss together. May these flames remind us that these souls and their stories are forever a part of our lives, and may their memory continue to be a blessing for each one of us. As we have done for the last 20 years at Chapman University, tonight we light 6 candles in memory of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, including more than 1 million Jewish children. We honor the survivors and witnesses to the Holocaust and the members of the second, third, and fourth generations who carry their witness into the future. Sherry Bard and Robin Bard, daughter and granddaughter of Holocaust survivor and witness Henry Silberstein of blessed memory. Holocaust survivor and witness Angelina Billauer with grandson Jesse Billauer. Nancy and Irving Chase, son of Holocaust survivors Faye and Saul Chase, both of blessed memory. Daughter Katie and son Ryan with spouse Brooke and children Sadie and Benjamin. Holocaust survivors and witnesses Fela and Natan Gipsman. Holocaust survivor and witness Elizabeth Mann with son Thomas Mann. Holocaust survivor and witness Jack Pariser with daughter Sandy King, granddaughter Samantha Bone, and grandson Evan King. Eternal God, creator of the universe, on this most solemn of occasions, we reach out to you with our hearts, our minds, and our prayers. We remember the 6 million who were murdered, the indifference and the evil that allowed this atrocity to happen. We honor the survivors, the victims, the martyrs, and the heroes. We ask you to soothe our souls, to amplify our memories, to strengthen our resolve, and to hear our prayers. We ask you to sit with us in our sorrow as we remember those we have lost and those whose stories were shared with us this evening. We hope that we will remember the mistakes of the past and ensure that we will never again sit idly by while our brothers and sisters are led to slaughter. We ask you to strengthen us to stand up and speak out against anti-Semitism and acts of hate. We say never again, and we dedicate ourselves to this principle, to the idea that justice does not allow persecution, that genocide shall not be repeated, and that vigilance is the responsibility of freedom at all costs. We ask that you hear our prayers. We pray for the millions of souls who were lost and whose memories and stories we carry with us and will share with future generations. We pray that the lessons we learn from this darkest hour allow all humankind to better itself and to truly and nobly embody the idea that we are each made in your image. Above all, we pray for peace and wholeness, for shalom, to be in our midst, now and forever. We ask you, our eternal creator, to answer our prayers and to bring us a world devoid of hatred and instead filled with peace. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. Amen.
Hi, I'm Nina LeNoir, and I had the opportunity back in 2013 to direct The Worlds Within the Words of Elie Wiesel. Working with the young people who helped to create this event and who served as interpreters of the words for the piece was an incredible experience. They took these words and made them their own by embodying as much as they could that experience that was communicated through the words. I think that's one of the things that we lose sometimes today, is that sense of empathy that all of the student actors discovered by working with the words themselves. This experience was so special to everyone involved, particularly to the students, and I know very much to me, and I carry it with me and will for the rest of my life. I hope that it will be something that you will be moved by this evening.
Hi, I'm Chase Cargill. I graduated from Chapman University in 2014 with a BFA of Theater Performance, and I am an actor and a writer living in Los Angeles.
Hi, my name is Allie Hill, and I graduated from Chapman in 2013. I'm currently living in Los Angeles and working as an actor.
My name is Angelia Formasano. I graduated Chapman University in 2013, 8 years ago. And I currently live in Orange County and I work in sales.
Hi, I'm Cindy Nguyen. I graduated from Chapman University in 2014, and I'm currently living in Los Angeles, working blessedly as an actor in theater, television, and lots of commercials.
Hi, my name is Matthew Gallenstein. I graduated from Chapman in 2013, and I'm currently living in San Francisco, where I'm pursuing graduate studies in clinical psychology.
My name is Sam Forrest. I graduated from Chapman University in 2014. I currently live in Los Angeles, and I work at Rolling Stone as a director of brand partnerships.
My name is Trevor Shore, and I graduated from Chapman University in 2013. I'm currently living in Los Angeles, and I'm an actor, and I own my own online retail business. When we did the performance in 2013, the first thing I felt was that it was such an honor to get to not only meet Mr. Wiesel, but also say the words and perform the words that he wrote to him and for this audience of people that were gathered to honor him.
Being a part of this performance all these years ago was truly unforgettable. It's always there's always a bit of pressure when you're reading an author or a playwright's words in front of them. And I'll never forget performing these incredible words and sneaking glances at him during the performance and seeing there was no judgment, no fear in his eyes. It was just warmth and smiling the whole time. And I thought that was really amazing that he had no judgment in it for these performers. He was just there with us, fully supportive. And I thought that was a really amazing experience to of course know who this author is and to have read so much of his work, and to see how he responded to it in person. I'll never forget it. It was just, he was a radiant human being.
It was an incredible experience to be able to speak Elie Wiesel's words and know that he was listening to us.
Performing Elie Wiesel's words in front of him was profound and special beyond belief. We'd spent weeks rehearsing, getting ready for this, but nothing prepares you for that exact moment when you're there, he steps away, and you're reciting the incredible words that he wrote. And I think in the moment is when I realized that, the importance of that and the impact of that. All these people are there to hear us recite his words. And something about that just unlocks the emotion and the truth and the honesty and vulnerability of everything he had ever written.
I think for me, theater in general can be a somewhat like sacred kind of experience. You're these people in a room sharing a moment that is transient and will never happen again. And there's usually this exchange of the audience and the performers such that, you know, each is changed in a way. And it felt really special to be in that space with Elie as well, to not just be having his words be sort of the conduit for the relationship with the audience, but to also have him be part of the audience as well and sort of share that with him. It was something that stands out as really humbling and a really poignant experience for me.
Looking back on my experience reading Elie Wiesel's words, especially with him in the audience, and it felt like I was a part of history, part of his legacy in it, and it felt like a huge honor to be chosen for this as a performer, but also as a human being to be part of his legacy.
And I think for all of us, all 8 of us who had the honor of reciting those words, it became clear in that moment that we weren't just performing or putting on a performance or acting in any sense of the word. We were honoring him. And that was really special.
And just standing up there on that stage with my peers as we read it, it really did feel like everyone in that room was part of a community and part of this same experience, which has a lot to do, of course, with the themes he was writing about and that we were talking about through his words. And I remember just hearing it aloud and saying it aloud how very real and fresh it felt. A lot of the ideas felt so, relevant to the day that we were reading them. And I just remember being overpowered by that feeling.
It was one of the final projects I got to work on at Chapman University. And it felt like a really special sort of capstone to my time there. Performing theater and film, there's a bunch of different types of projects that I got to do at Chapman. And oftentimes with some of the writing, it was me as an actor trying to elevate the writing to the intricacies of human experience. But Elie Wiesel's words were different in a way. They required me to really dig deeper within myself. They made me think about things in a new way. And it felt that I, in a way, had to live up to the words, which I think was compounded by the fact that he was there, in the audience, watching us sort of convey his words, which was, in some ways intimidating, but in other ways, this tall order that I really sort of felt honored to have the opportunity to kind of live up to.
And 7-8 years later, I still think about it often. Every time I go to my bookcase, I see Night there, and it brings back those memories. And how special it was, and how time is so fleeting. And especially over this past year during a pandemic, we've all seen that, and it really made me cherish that moment even more.
I felt a huge responsibility to tell this story well, with humility, grace, compassion, as much as I can lend it, because the words were so strong. Elie Wiesel's words are simple, but they cut so deeply to the core. And I felt a huge responsibility to share these words and make sure that I really tried to understand as much about them as he got me to understand them. And I felt like that was almost like, as Elie Wiesel felt the responsibility to share his experience, I felt the responsibility to share his experience well and make sure that I was honoring him and honoring those who he wanted to honor through his work.
In thinking back to Elie's words and the performance and sort of the ways that I've carried them in a way since that time, there is an image that has always stuck with me. It involves a description from a scene in Night where Elie hears someone playing this Beethoven concerto on violin in the midst of this sort of obscene suffering around him. And it's this really touching juxtaposition of this moment of beauty, of like fleeting beauty, and the power of art and music to be able to capture this beauty, but also amidst, really terrible suffering.
Elie Wiesel's words really remind you that even though you're in what seems to be a beautiful world, right? One day, the next day, something could happen that you were never expecting. Truly, in the pandemic, I've learned, and Ellie's words tell us this too, is that it's most important to be good people, to love, to be there for each other, and the love that we put out in the world is the most important thing.
And I think, within the past year, even with the pandemic, tremendous amount of people suffering and sort of trauma that has come up around that. And I think for me, at least, finding these small but brief moments of beauty and being able to recognize those and honor them and acknowledge them and sort of tell their story as well has been really helpful for me personally. And I think it's also a way that Elie Wiesel's work functions is it not only captures these kind of dualities of suffering and beauty, it captures both sides of them and presents them in a way that feels very personal, but also very sort of describing an experience for a community as well.
One of the quotes that he wrote in there that really stuck with me was, "I believed that having survived by chance, I was duty bound to give meaning to my survival, to justify each moment of my life." He had this desire to tell his story because it was necessary. It was necessary to remember and to keep the memory of those who were lost alive.
One quote, as I was revisiting all of this for today, that stood out to me was, "What I do know is that there is response and responsibility. When we speak of this era of evil and darkness, so close and yet so distant, responsibility is the key word." And I thought that was so important today and every day and then and now, because responsibility is the key word. And I think it's completely applicable and relevant to today.
Just knowing that everything that he's been through in his life, and I mean, he's such a revered figure, but also, just this wonderful man who survived these unimaginable horrors. And instead of letting them take him over, he was able to turn his experiences into ways of educating future generations about what really happened in order to prevent anything like the Holocaust from ever happening again.
What would the future of man be if it were devoid of memory? I think we can apply that to 2021 as we move out of 2020 and out of this pandemic, not trying to forget what we went through or the events that happened, but remembering them, remembering the people we lost, remembering the emotions we felt, the loneliness, the isolation, the despair, the hopelessness, whatever it is, and using that to move forward and to have hopefully more empathy.
Now living through such a historic time in terms of the pandemic and social change, we need the legacy of words. We need these stories to tell a younger generation, to not necessarily warn them, but to inform them. And that's how I felt reading his words. I felt informed, and I felt it was a cautionary tale that was so important. And I think in a digital age, a lot of that gets lost. And I hope that we're able to continue that legacy of using words and memories to honor the past.
I also think about the way that we as Americans in every single state, the reaction to this pandemic, and Elie Wiesel's words ring in my mind, that there's the response to responsibility, the response that we have of fear and fear of the unknown, fear for ourselves, fear for our family, fear for our friends, fear of this disease, of this illness, of this virus, fear of each other, and if we're going to get sick from other people, fearing people. And that we as people need to come together and feel that response, but also take it to responsibility and really go back to trying to take care of each other and trying to understand each other and trying to connect with each other, just as Elie Wiesel wanted us to and wanted us to keep doing. And despite people saying, no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to connect. Just as he said in Night, that no had to become yes. We need to say yes to life, yes to people, yes to connection, yes to remembering the lives that were lost, yes to honoring those that we've lost, honoring their memories by trying to take care of each other and trying to keep on connecting to people and listening to them and listening to their experiences and remembering.
I remember. It happened yesterday or eternities ago. A young Jewish boy discovered the kingdom of night. I remember his bewilderment. I remember his anguish. It all happened so fast. The ghetto, the deportation, the sealed cattle car, the fiery altar upon which the history of our people and the future of mankind were meant to be sacrificed.
I remember he asked his father, "Can this be true? This is the 20th century, not the Middle Ages. Who would allow such crimes to be committed? How could the world remain silent?"
And now the boy is turning to me. "Tell me," he asks, "what have you done with my future? What have you done with your life?" And I tell him that I have tried to keep memory alive, that I have tried to fight those who would forget. Because if we forget, we are guilty, we are accomplices.
They walk in the middle of the road like urchins. They are on the way to the station, and they will never return. In sealed cars without air or food, they travel toward another world. They guess where they are going. They know it, and they keep silent. They listen to the wind, the call of death in the distance.
All these children, these old people, I see them. I never stop seeing them. I belong to them. But they, to whom do they belong?
But then, the dead never leave me. They have their rightful place even in the works about pre-Holocaust Hasidism or ancient Jerusalem. Technically, so to speak, they are of course elsewhere, in time and space, but on a deeper, truer plane, the dead are part of every story, of every scene. They die with Isaac, lament with Jeremiah. They sing with the best, and like him, wait for miracles. But alas, they will not come to pass.
And yet the survivor may experience remorse. He has tried to bear witness. It was all in vain.
For the survivor, writing is not a profession, but a calling. It was by seeking, by probing silence, that I began to discover the perils and the power of the word. I never intended to be a novelist. The only role I sought was that of witness. I believed that, having survived by chance, I was duty-bound to give meaning to my survival, to justify each moment of my life. I knew the story had to be told. Not to transmit an experience is to betray it. This is what Jewish tradition teaches. But how to do this? We all knew that we could never say what had to be said, that we could never express in words, coherent, intelligible words, our experience of madness on an absolute scale. The walk through fiery nights, the silence before and after the selection, the toneless praying of the condemned, the Kaddish of the dying, the fear and hunger of the sick, the shame and suffering, the haunted eyes, the wild stares. I thought that I would never be able to speak of them. All words seemed inadequate, worn, foolish, lifeless, whereas I wanted them to sear.
The language of night was not human. It was primitive, almost animal. Hoarse shouting, screaming, muffled moaning, savage howling, the sounds of beating. A brute strikes wildly, a body falls. An officer raises his arm, and a whole community walks toward a common grave. A soldier shrugs his shoulders, and 1,000 families are torn apart to be reunited only by death. Such was the language of the concentration camp. It negated all other language and took its place. Rather than link people, it became a wall between them. Could the wall be scaled? Could the reader be brought to the other side? I knew the answer to be no, yet I also knew that no had to become yes. This was the wish, the last will of the dead. One had to shatter the wall encasing the darkest truth and give it a name. One had to force man to look.
The world has remained the world. Men have not changed, nor have they learned anything. Perhaps there was nothing to learn. And no one is happier than I when, under my pen, words fall into place, fit into a design, and create the illusion that they are leading somewhere.
In truth, I know where they lead, to where there are no words, to the mysterious forests where fathers and sons, Jews already marked by their executioner, always the same, tell each other a story, always the same. To where women with dark, dilated pupils, violated and drunk with pain, escort their children to the altar and beyond.
As in a dusty mirror, I look at my childhood and I wonder if it is mine. I don't recognize myself in the child who studies there with fervor, who says his prayers. It's because he is surrounded by other children. He walks like them, with them, head bowed and lips firm. He advances into the night as if attracted by its shadows. I watch them as they enter an abyss of flames. I see them transformed into ashes. I hear their cries turn into silence. And I no longer know anything. I no longer understand anything. They have taken away my certainties, and no one will give them back to me.
I know people think I have lost my mind. They probably think the same of you. Why? Because we are both seeking our dead. I've been at it for years. Vanished, all of them, in one night. In the time it takes God to frown, they were gone. Emptied the towns of Poland, evacuated the villages of Hungary, erased the hamlets of Lithuania. Jews had lived there for centuries until the lethal wind blew. This crime was different. This was an entirely new crime, an absolute crime. Absolute, since the killers made the corpses disappear. For the first time in our history, the victims could not even be buried. 6 million human beings. That's a whole country, a nation. After all, they couldn't have been erased like a typographical error. Or could they? And so I began to search. First, I tried the cemeteries. I must have visited every cemetery in Europe, small ones, large ones, rich and poor ones that are known and others that are not. I found nothing. I explored wastelands, mountains, forests, still nothing. Yes, I discovered mass graves here and there, vast pits covered with lime and ashes. But where are all the other corpses? Eventually, I came up with a theory. They must all have gone to heaven. I glanced up at the sky. My heart began to pound. I was right. There they were. There they remain.
If in my lifetime I was to write only one book, this would be the one. Just as the past lingers in the present, all my writings after night, including those that deal with biblical, Talmudic, or Hasidic themes, profoundly bear its stamp and cannot be understood if one has not read this very first of my works. Why did I write it? Did I write it so as not to go mad, or on the contrary, to go mad in order to understand the nature of madness, the immense, terrifying madness that had erupted in history and in the conscience of mankind? Was it to leave behind a legacy of words, of memories, to help prevent history from repeating itself? Or was it simply to preserve a record of the ordeal I endured as an adolescent, at an age when one's knowledge of death and evil should be limited to what one discovers in literature?
I knew that while I had many things to say, I did not have the words to say them. Painfully aware of my limitations, I watched helplessly as language became an obstacle. It became clear that it would be necessary to invent a new language. But how was one to rehabilitate and transform words betrayed and perverted by the enemy? Hunger, thirst, fear, transport, selection, fire, chimney. These words all have intrinsic meaning, but in those times they meant something else. Writing in my mother tongue, at that point close to extinction, I would pause at every sentence and start over and over again. I would conjure up other words, other verbs, other images, other silent cries. It still was not right. But what exactly was it? It was something elusive, darkly shrouded for fear of being usurped, profaned. All the dictionary had to offer seemed meager, pale, lifeless. Was there a way to describe the last journey in sealed cattle cars, the last voyage toward the unknown, or the discovery of a demented and glacial universe where to be inhuman was human, where disciplined, educated men in uniform came to kill, and innocent children and weary old men came to die?
Get up, sir, get up. You must ready yourself for the journey. Tomorrow, you will be expelled, you and your family, you and all the other Jews. Where to? Please don't ask me, sir. Don't ask questions. God alone could answer you. For heaven's sake, get up. He had no idea what I was talking about. He probably thought I had lost my mind. What are you saying? Get ready for the journey. What journey? Why? What is happening? Have you gone mad? My throat was dry and the words were choking me, paralyzing my lips. There was nothing else to say. There was a woman among us, a certain Mrs. Schechter. She was in her 50s, and her 10-year-old son was with her, crouched in a corner. Her husband and 2 older sons had been deported with the first transport by mistake. The separation had totally shattered her. Fire! I see a fire! I see a fire! There was a moment of panic. Who had screamed? It was Mrs. Schechter. Standing in the middle of the car in the faint light filtering through the windows, she looked like a withered tree in a field of wheat. She was howling, pointing through the window. Look! Look at this fire, this terrible fire. Have mercy on me. Some pressed against the bars to see. There was nothing. Only the darkness of night. The night seemed endless. By daybreak, Mrs. Schechter had settled down. Crouching in her corner, her blank gaze fixed on some faraway place, she no longer saw us. Toward evening, she began to shout again. The fire! Over there! She was pointing somewhere in the distance, always the same place. No one felt like beating her anymore. The heat, the thirst, the stench, the lack of air were suffocating us. Yet all that was nothing compared to her screams, which tore us apart. A few more days and all of us would have started to scream. But we were pulling into a station, so someone near a window read to us, Auschwitz. Nobody had ever heard that name. I glanced over at my father. How changed he looked. The night had passed completely. The morning star shone in the sky. I, too, had become a different person. The student of Talmud, the child I was, had been consumed by the flames. All that was left was a shape that resembled me. My soul had been invaded and devoured by a black flame. So many events had taken place in just a few hours that I had completely lost all notion of time. When had we left our homes? And the ghetto and the train only a week ago, one night, one single night? How long had we been standing in the freezing rain? 1 hour? 1 single hour, 60 minutes? Surely it was a dream. Father? Are you there? I asked as soon as I was able to utter a word. I knew that he could not be far from me. Yes, a voice replied from far away as if from another world. He was trying to sleep. Could one fall asleep here? Wasn't it dangerous to lower one's guard even for a moment when death could strike at any time? Those were my thoughts when I heard the sound of a violin. A violin in a dark barrack where the dead were piled on top of the living? Who was this madman who played the violin here at the edge of his own grave? It had to be Juliek. He was playing a fragment of a Beethoven concerto. Never before had I heard such a beautiful sound. In such silence, the darkness enveloped us. All I could hear was the violin, and it was as if Juliek's soul had become his bow. He was playing his life. His whole being was gliding over the strings, his unfulfilled hopes, his charred past, his extinguished future. He played that which he would never play again. I shall never forget Juliek. How could I forget this concert given before an audience of the dead and dying? Even today, when I hear this particular piece by Beethoven, my eyes close, and out of the darkness emerges the pale and melancholy face of my Polish comrade bidding farewell to an audience of dying men. I don't know how long he played. I was overcome by sleep. When I awoke at daybreak, I saw Juliek facing me, hunched over, dead. Next to him lay his violin, trampled, an eerily poignant little corpse.
3 days after the liberation of Buchenwald, I became very ill, some form of poisoning. I was transferred to a hospital and spent 2 weeks between life and death. One day when I was able to get up, I decided to look at myself in the mirror on the opposite wall. I had not seen myself since the ghetto. From the depths of the mirror, a corpse was contemplating me. The look in his eyes as he gazed at me has never left me.
Have I performed my duty as a survivor? Have I transmitted all I was able to? Too much, perhaps. To begin, I attempted to describe the time of darkness. Birkenau, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, a slight volume, night. First in Yiddish, and the world remained silent, in which every sentence, every word reflects an experience that defies all comprehension. I rarely reread myself, but when I do, I come away with a bitter taste in my mouth. I feel the words are not right and that I could have said it better. In my writings about the event, did I commit a sin by saying too much, while knowing that no person who did not experience the proximity of death there can ever understand what we, the survivors, were subjected to from morning till night under a silent sky?
I believe it is important to emphasize how strongly I feel like that books, just like people, have a destiny. Some invite sorrow, others joy, some both. For the survivor who chooses to testify, it is clear. His duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time.
Sometimes I'm asked if I know the response to Auschwitz. I answer that not only do I not know it, but that I don't know if a tragedy of this magnitude has a response. What I do know is that there is response and responsibility. When we speak of this era of evil and darkness, so close and yet so distant, responsibility is the key word.
The witness has forced himself to testify for the youth of today, for the children who will be born tomorrow. He does not want his past to become their future.
For memory is a blessing. It creates bonds rather than destroys them, bonds between present and past, between individuals and groups. It is because I remember our common beginning that I move closer to my fellow human beings. It is because I refuse to forget that their future is as important as my own. What would the future of man be if it were devoid of memory?
There are still so many things I want to share with my 2 grandchildren, for whom my love is without limits. When Elijah smiles at me, I know that happiness exists after all. His little sister, Shira, both charming and authoritarian, orders me around and makes me laugh. To watch them play together, to listen to Elijah reading to his sister is the most beautiful present I could receive.
The beginning, the end, all the world's roads, all the outcries of mankind lead to this accursed place. Here is the kingdom of night, where God's face is hidden and a flaming sky becomes a graveyard for a vanquished people. The beauty of the landscape around Birkenau is like a slap in the face. The low clouds, the dense forest, the calm solemnity of the scenery. The silence is peaceful, soothing. Dante understood nothing. Hell is a setting where serene splendor takes the breath away. Why does the sun shine so brightly? Here at Birkenau, the sun shines in the middle of the night. Is that why I returned? To make this discovery? No. Survivors do not come back to Birkenau. They have never left. I hear the wind rushing through the trees, but it was not really the wind. I heard the murmur rising from the earth, but it was not the earth that spoke. It was night. It was death. And there is nothing left to say. Another Kaddish, and another one. How many prayers can one say for an entire world? How many candles must one light for mankind? So as not to betray ourselves by betraying the dead, we can only open ourselves to their silenced memories. And listen.
It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. Ariel Berger, teacher, writer, artist, and rabbi, whose work combines spirituality, creativity, and strategies for social change. Rabbi Berger first met Elie Wiesel when he was only 15 years old. That meeting had a lasting impact on Ariel, leading him to Boston University to study with Professor Wiesel as an undergraduate, and then later, after study in Israel, to return to Boston University to earn his PhD with Professor Wiesel and to serve for several years as his much valued teaching assistant. Reviews of Dr. Berger's book, Witness, Lessons from Elie Wiesel's Classroom, describe it as, quote, beautiful and brilliant, inspiring and substantive, unquote. The book was honored in 2018 with the National Jewish Book Award for Biography. I am so pleased that Dr. Berger could be part of tonight's virtual program. And now, Rabbi Berger.
Hello, friends. Those of us who were privileged to spend any time with Professor Wiesel know that his central commitment was to memory. And we also know that when he said the word memory, he said it always with a capital M. Memory was a sacred word for him, and he wanted it to become sacred to us. A fierce commitment to memory drove everything that he did as a teacher, as a writer, as an activist, in all of his work and all of his deep commitment to making the world better. He was driven by the commitment, the commandment to remember. And memory for Professor Wiesel was not only information about the past, although of course that's important, and it must be said today that information about the past, and particularly about the Holocaust, is a deeply endangered subject. We know, you may have seen several studies that show that young people today, too many young people today, don't remember the basic information, the most basic information about the best documented event in human history, which happened not too long ago. 23% of millennials couldn't identify the word Holocaust in one study, and 66% of millennials could not identify the word Auschwitz. So we have a lot of work to do in remembering, in telling the story and the stories of what happened during the Holocaust. But Professor Wiesel meant more than knowledge of the past when he spoke about memory. He also meant the kind of profound encounter with a story that can change your life, a story that can make you more likely to be sensitive to another person's suffering, more likely to take responsibility. And the stories we carry can sensitize us. And as he said, sensitivity hurts. Being sensitive hurts. And he said, so what? Think of the people to whom you have to be sensitive. Their pain is greater than yours. And so when we put ourselves in dialogue with others, with other stories of our ancestors or our teachers, and especially stories that Professor Wiesel himself told from Jewish tradition, from the Bible, or about the great sages of the Talmud, or about the beloved Hasidic masters to whom he turned always for strength and moral clarity and depth, we find that the stories are what sensitize us. The stories are what give us the strength, the power to overcome our own limitations and become better, more compassionate, more courageous, more likely to step up and do the difficult thing. And the power of stories and storytelling is at the center of what memory meant and continues to mean to those of us who follow the teachings of Professor Wiesel. I often think of Professor Wiesel's teachings as a kind of living house of study. You know, in Jewish tradition, there are houses of study, a Beit Midrash, and the houses of study are often named after the founding teacher. So in the Talmud, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, the early rabbinic period, we have Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. And I think of those of us who are engaged with Professor Wiesel's teachings in the way that you are, and in the way that many try to be and are working to expand now in the world. We are involved in building and continuing what I might call Beit Eliezer, the house of Elie Wiesel, the house of study of Elie Wiesel. And what's involved in this house of study? First, a central commitment to moral growth. We are not just engaged in learning for the sake of intellectual growth or accomplishment. We are really interested in becoming better people, better human beings. What does it mean to be a better human being? Well, Professor Wiesel taught us very clearly what it means. It means to be more sensitive to the people around us and more responsible and more implicated when we see suffering in the world. He often said that his task, his goal as an educator was to move us from being spectators to being witnesses. And a witness is someone who takes things personally and takes things seriously and feels implicated in events in the world and doesn't feel that the suffering of someone else on the other side of the world is irrelevant or something from which I can turn away. And so the challenge that Professor Wiesel left for us today, and it's a challenge that our world needs to wrestle with very profoundly and very urgently right now, is the challenge of not looking away, turning to face the reality of suffering and injustice in the world, and at the same time, not falling into the trap of despair when we look at the world, when we see what's happening in the world. Because there's so much suffering. There's so much suffering. And in his powerful book, Four Hasidic Masters and Their Struggles with Melancholy, Professor Wiesel discussed the challenge of being an empathetic person who takes on the suffering of others in an attempt to help, to show solidarity and friendship. It affects you over time. And so as we do the difficult work of not looking away and of asking ourselves, how can I make a difference each and every day? How can I be true to memory and allow myself to become more empathetic, compassionate, and courageous in the service of compassion? How can I cultivate my passion for compassion? We need, at the same time, to cultivate joy. We need a fierce commitment to joy. And Professor Wiesel, you may know, had a very profound connection to music. And he once told me that he always had a song in his mind, always. He had a Hasidic melody or something else in his mind, and it gave him great strength in moments when he was trying to change the trajectory of global policy or American foreign policy, when he was trying to prevent a genocide or stop a genocide or other oppressive circumstance. The nigun, the melody, the Hasidic melody often in his mind, was what gave him a secret source of strength, as did his commitment to learning, his curiosity, his sense of wonder, his childlike sense of wonder at the twists and turns of a story in the Bible or in Camus or Kafka or in any of the other great texts that he loved to learn and to teach. These were the things that gave him strength. Now, where do we find strength today when we no longer are able to knock on Professor Wiesel's door and ask him our questions or share our struggles? Well, we find strength in his teachings, in his novels and his books of nonfiction, in his lectures, many of which are online, we can still see them, in our memories of him, of course, and not insignificantly in one another. There is a community of people who were touched by Professor Wiesel, and this community is global, extremely diverse. It's of all ages, people with many backgrounds and stories. We have some things in common, even if we've never met. We know what the phrase "and yet" means. We know that joy is possible in spite of all the evidence of history. We know that there was a man who was somehow able to alchemically transmute suffering into curiosity, life, commitment to life, and activism on behalf of people who were suffering. And we know that he was able to do that, and that he believed that we could do it too. And as we're living through a time of great moral challenge and urgent questions and a lot of suffering and a lot of isolation, we have to remember that there are hidden ties that bind us, that our teachers saw and celebrated. And remember what he told his students very often at the beginning of a semester of study. He would say, "My hope for you, my wish for you, is that you will meet one another in 20 years, and you will remember that you studied together in a classroom. You studied Kafka together, or Virginia Woolf, or Anne Royfie together, and you will remember the questions that you asked, and you will remember the stories that you told or that you heard." And I think this is a wish, a blessing, a gift that he left for all of us. The connections that we have made with one another and that we can still make with one another, the ways that we can share certain questions about the world, about literature, about friendship, and ultimately about memory. Memory is the key to opening the door to joy, to fierce moral commitment, and to that transformation of suffering for ourselves and for others. It's in our hands. The world is in our hands now. And Professor Wiesel left us tools to do the work of making this world sweeter, kinder, more generous, more just. So I bless you all to continue that legacy, each of you in your own individual ways, and together we have a lot of strength, and the love that we feel for our teacher should drive us to extend ourselves beyond our limitations, beyond our own loneliness or anxiety or fears, to find the courage to live a life of compassion. Thank you.
Eile mole Rachamim Shochem b'meromim Hametzei menuchot nechono Tachas kanefei hashchino B'malos kedoshim kedoshim utori Kezohar horokiya ma'asiri Esni shemos Achenu v'yachyosenu Achenu v'yachyosenu Shenehergo V'shenishikho oto V'sheniserofo ביד הרוצחים הגרמנים. על קידוש השם. בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתו. לא כן בלו רחמים יסתירם בססר כנופוף לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים. אסן ישמעיהם אדוני ונחלו ובוסום וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן.
As we come to a close, recall the words of Elie Wiesel, read so powerfully earlier in this program. I do not know if a tragedy of this magnitude has a response. What I do know is that there is response and responsibility. As 2021 dawned, our nation sat horrified, witnessing the open expression of hate as insurrectionists stormed our nation's capital. Among those involved were members of white supremacist groups who increasingly openly disseminate anti-Jewish and racist speech, which is too often met with silence. As Wiesel wrote, we must understand the perils and the power of the word. Our responsibility continues to remind our nation that the peril of hateful speech has led to unthinkable violence in the past. Our responsibility arises once again as we are called in this moment to speak and act truth to power on behalf of every group, every human being today experiencing attack, whether from angry, storming mobs or systematic policies against ethnicities, races, and religions. What I do know is that there is response and responsibility. We have responded by coming together for this program. Our responsibility continues to keep Holocaust remembrance alive. 2021 brings peril, but it also brings hope that we will be able to gather in person next time. Thank you for joining us virtually this year. We are deeply grateful for you, for your life, and for your presence with us. May God bless you and keep you safe.